We continue to track the on-the-ground effects of budget cuts in U.S. international aid.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Certified Financial Planner Professionals. Learn more about CFP professionals at letsmakeaplan.org.
I'm David Brancaccio in Los Angeles. Supporters of the U.S. Agency for International Development are headed to Capitol Hill today to lobby lawmakers and staffers. The cutting of budgets and jobs at USAID has derailed aid programs around the world. The State Department says it's terminating about 80% of USAID's grants and contracts. Aid groups say even life-saving humanitarian programs that the department had promised to protect are faltering, and children especially could suffer. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer explains.
Mark Moore is racing to make up for lost time. He's CEO of Manna Nutrition, a nonprofit that makes a nutritional paste from peanuts for starving children. He's talking to me from a Manna office in Charlotte, North Carolina. Over Zoom, he points to a pallet of food.
And you can see that USAID logo there.
I see it. Most of Moore's packets of nutritional paste are sent to Africa. Earlier this year, Moore got a series of emails from his main client, USAID.
It's been a yo-yo effect. First, it was an email in January.
The emails said Moore's contracts were paused. He should stop work. But a week later, he was told to resume operations. But then a few weeks after that, never mind, Moore's contracts were abruptly canceled. USAID said Manna's life-sustaining packets weren't in the national interest. Then the yo-yo bounced up a final time when a week later, Moore was told to restart. He did, even though the federal government still owes him a lot of money.
Somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million.
All this time, Moore was thinking about the children in places like Sudan and Chad who depend on Manna's nutritional paste. He says if these malnourished kids go for a week without food,
for a child under 6, especially these children, it'll cost them their life.
Moore says it's all well and good for him to be producing his packets again, but they still have to get to these children. And he says there could be big supply disruptions this summer because of other contract cancellations and payment disruptions for shippers and nonprofits that run feeding centers. If they're not able to restart their work, the outlook is grim. Moore says children will die.
We may not even be able to count them. They will have nowhere to go. So it would probably look like tens of thousands of children dying quietly at home.
In an email, the State Department told me, quote, critical U.S. aid program awards remain active. But Charles Kenny, senior fellow at the Center for Global Development, says for the most part, USAID still isn't able to make payments or issue new contracts. And not just for food aid. Kenny says the U.S. also paid for antiviral drugs for HIV and AIDS patients across the globe.
Without all of that being fixed, we have an emergency of just an awesome scale. I mean, we are talking 3, maybe 4 million deaths over the course of a year.
Kenny says the first victims of any AIDS crisis will be children born to HIV-positive mothers who weren't taking antiviral drugs. He says if those babies don't get antivirals right away, around half of them could die within a year. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
Checking numbers about half an hour before the opening bell on Wall Street. Dow futures are up 0.1%. S&P futures are down 0.1%. NASDAQ futures are down 0.2%. After that index lost 2% yesterday. The NASDAQ is down 7.3% year to date amid the uncertainty over policy, especially tariff policy.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business, dedicated to helping businesses save time on office tasks and empower leaders with business buying solutions that support teams to focus on growing the business. Learn about smart business buying at AmazonBusiness.com.
On Capitol Hill yesterday, executives from our industry, public media, faced calls to end the federal government's contribution to funding for public television and public radio. The heads of PBS and NPR appeared at a House hearing with Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, alleging bias in NPR coverage and inappropriate content on PBS television. There was also a focus on funding beyond the government piece, namely the underwriting announcements companies buy. The Trump administration has opened an investigation into whether those have become fully fledged commercials that might break federal rules. Now, public television and public radio organizations say funding models comply with the law. For context here, we spoke to Victor Picard, a professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communication.
Most of the funding for public broadcasting comes actually from donations, sponsorships, grants, from foundations, and indeed from corporations. And what has become euphemistically known as underwriting or enhanced underwriting often comes in the form of corporate sponsorship of particular programs.
Picard says government rules evolved over decades with less federal subsidy available.
There were rule changes, especially in the early 1980s at the FCC, that actually made it easier and loosened restrictions on how public broadcasting stations could announce sponsorship on the air, for example, and just kind of incentivized almost, you might say, public broadcasters to seek out this kind of corporate sponsorship.
Congresswoman Taylor Greene argued yesterday that eliminating federal funding for public media is a matter of economic priorities.
The United States is $36 trillion in debt. In fiscal year 2024, the government spent over $1.8 trillion more than it took in. And in fiscal year 2025, the interest on our debt is expected to exceed $1 trillion. As we continue investigating waste, fraud, and abuse, we can look no further than the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
The Georgia Congresswoman went on to conclude,
because the reality is the United States of America is broke and can't afford it.
In 2023, for instance, the main vehicle for government funding for public media, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Grants, was at $336 million. The industry newspaper called Current looked at how that breaks down state by state and found it to be $1.52 per person in the U.S., but varying by state, 50 cents a year per person in Texas and Georgia, for example, and more than $11 a year for Alaskans. Disclosure, this program, Marketplace, benefits from Corporation for Public Broadcasting funding since the federal subsidy can help local public media stations buy our programming. In Los Angeles, I'm David Brancaccio with the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.